A man in a $20,000 Tom Ford suit stands beside a woman, draped in Chanel, her laughter like the chime of expensive crystal. They are in the lobby of the Grand Elysian, a palace of marble and gold in the heart of New York City. He is Damien Ashworth, a man who clawed his way to millions. She is Serafina, his beautiful secret. But then he freezes. Across the cavernous lobby, a woman is on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor. Her movements are slow, careful. He sees the swell of her belly beneath the cheap grey uniform. It's a sight he never thought he'd see again. It's his wife, Isabella. And in that moment, his carefully constructed world of wealth and power begins to fracture because he has no idea that the floor she is cleaning is the least valuable thing she owns in this building. The air in the Grand Elysian Hotel wasn't merely conditioned, it was curated. It smelled of money. A subtle bespoke fragrance of white tea freesia and old leather that was pumped through the vents, a scent signature as exclusive as the clientele. Damien Ashworth breathed it in a familiar perfume of success. At his side, Serafina Dubois adjusted the silk scarf at her neck, her sharp sapphire eyes scanning the lobby with the practiced gaze of a predator assessing her territory. "It's breathtaking, darling," she murmured, her voice a low purr that always made Damien feel like the most powerful man in the room. "Absolutely breathtaking. You have impeccable taste." "Only the best, Serafina." "For us?" Damien replied, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He was a man sculpted by ambition. His jaw was tight, his shoulders broad from years of carrying the weight of his own expectations. He had come from a world of cracked pavement and second-hand clothes, a world he had incinerated with ruthless determination. Now his world was Patek Philippe. Watches offshore accounts, and women like Serafina. Women who were as polished and transactional as his business deals. They were here for the Global Innovators Gala, an event crawling with the kind of venture capitalists and tech moguls Damien needed to court for his latest acquisition. Ashworth Capital was his baby, his monument, and it was perpetually hungry. Serafina was an essential part of the performance. She looked like new money, felt exciting, flawless, and a little dangerous. His wife, Isabella, was the opposite. She was old money, but you'd never know it. Quiet, unassuming, with a gentle soul and a preference for libraries over limousines. He had met her at a university fundraiser. He was the ambitious scholarship kid. She was the doe-eyed daughter of a modest history professor, or so he thought. She was sweet-grounded, a soft place to land. In the beginning, that softness was a balm to his raw ambition. He saw her as a project, a simple girl he could mold into the perfect wife for a man of his rising stature. But she had resisted the molding. She disliked the galas, found the schmoozing distasteful, and preferred volunteering at a soup kitchen to shopping on Fifth Avenue. Her pregnancy, which should have been a triumphant symbol of his legacy, had only made her more withdrawn. She was an anchor, he'd started to think, holding him back from the stratosphere he was destined for. "I need to speak with Olivier Rothschild before the cocktails begin," Damien said, guiding Serafina toward the magnificent archway leading to the ballroom. His fund could be the final piece of the puzzle. "He'll be eating out of your hand," Serafina cooed, her red lacquered nails gently tracing the lapel of his suit. It was then that his gaze drifted past the cascading crystal chandelier, past a bronze statue of Atlas, and landed on a service corridor. A cleaning cart was parked nearby, and there on her hands and knees was a woman in a drab, ill-fitting grey uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, messy bun. She was scrubbing at a stubborn scuff mark on the Italian marble, her movements weary but deliberate. Damien's blood ran cold. He stopped dead, his hand falling from Serafina's back. The curated air suddenly felt thin, suffocating. It couldn't be. It was a trick of the light, a phantom of his own anxieties. But then she shifted, turning her head slightly to wipe a bead of sweat from her brow, and the soft light of the lobby caught her profile. Isabella. His Isabella. Pregnant with his child. Scrubbing the floor of a hotel like a common servant. A volcano of emotions erupted in his chest. Shock, disbelief, followed by a tidal wave of pure hot humiliation. It was a betrayal of everything he had built. His wife, the woman who carried the Ashworth name, was on the floor like refuse, while he stood here, trying to project an image of untouchable power. What if someone saw her? What if Rothschild saw her? The thought was a physical blow. Damien. What is it? Serafina's voice cut through his paralysis. She followed his horrified stare. Who is that? Do you know her? She saw a poor, pregnant cleaner. Her tone was laced with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Damien couldn't speak. The image was burning itself into his mind. Isabella, who was supposed to be at a prenatal yoga class in their quiet, respectable suburb. Isabella, who had access to a fortune, was here performing the most menial labor imaginable. She looks a little like your wife. Serafina observed her voice, now sharp with suspicion. She had only seen Isabella in a few photographs, the plain woman in the background of Damien's life. From the photos you have at the penthouse, the word wife from Serafina's lips was like acid. He felt the judgment in her eyes, the silent calculation. His mistress was witnessing the ultimate crack in his facade, the powerful Damien Ashworth, whose wife was a floor scrubber. The scandal of it, the sheer shame, was nauseating. That's not her. He snapped his voice, harsher than he intended. Don't be ridiculous. But his eyes couldn't lie. He saw the gentle slope of her nose, the curve of her cheek. He saw the simple silver band on her left hand, the wedding ring he had given her now just inches from grime and dirty water. A wave of fury washed over him, eclipsing the shame. How dare she? How dare she do this to him? Excuse me for a moment, he muttered to Serafina, his face a mask of controlled rage. He began walking towards Isabella, his expensive leather shoes clicking like gunshots on the marble. Each step was fueled by a fresh surge of anger. He wasn't just walking toward his wife. He was marching toward the living embodiment of his deepest fear, the poverty and anonymity he thought he had escaped forever. He was going to drag her out of here away from prying eyes and demand an explanation for this ultimate act of sabotage. Serafina watched him go, a slow, predatory smile touching her lips. This was far more interesting than any business deal. The perfect man had a flaw, a deep, dirty secret, and she was the one who was here to see it unravel. The scent Isabella Rossi knew was not the hotel's bespoke fragrance, but the sharp chemical tang of industrial floor cleaner. The feeling she knew was not the plush velvet of the lounge chairs, but the cold, hard marble biting into her knee-paps through the thin fabric of her uniform trousers. For the past 3 weeks, she had not been Isabella Ashworth, resident of a sterile suburban mansion. She had been Bella, the new cleaner on the morning shift, a quiet woman who kept to herself another invisible cog in the great gilded machine of the Grand Elysian. And she was the one who owned the machine. The Rossi Hotel Group was Isabella's inheritance, a legacy forged not in boardrooms, but in the heart of her grandfather Antonio Rossi. He was an Italian immigrant who started with a single modest guest house in Brooklyn and a simple philosophy. A hotel is a home not just for the guests who pay, but for the staff who build it. Take care of your family, and the house will stand forever. He had known every employee by name, from the head chef to the laundry maids. He'd paid for their children's schooling, celebrated their weddings, and mourned their losses. Her father had maintained that ethos. But after his passing, the board, led by a new generation of slick, profit-driven executives, had begun to steer the ship in a different direction. Isabella, as the majority shareholder, sat at the head of the table, but she felt the current pulling against her. Profits were up, but whispers had begun to reach her not through official channels, but through hushed anonymous emails. Complaints of cut hours, denied benefits managers who ruled through fear and a general sense of being disposable. It was a rot starting at the foundation of her grandfather's empire. She had tried to address it from the top down. The executives, particularly a man named Marcus Thorne, the COO, presented her with polished spreadsheets and glowing reports. The complaints were dismissed as the grumblings of a few disgruntled employees. "In a company this size, Ms. Rossi," Thorne had said, with a dismissive smile, "you're always going to have some friction." Isabella knew friction. This felt like a fracture. So she decided to listen to her grandfather's voice in her head. "If you want to know the truth of a house," he used to say, "don't ask the master, ask the mice in the walls." And so she became a mouse. Mr. Abernathy, the general manager of the Grand Elysian, and a man who had been Antonio Rossi's right hand for 40 years, was the only one who knew her true identity. He was a man of impeccable discretion and unwavering loyalty. He had set her up with a fake identity, a locker and a uniform. "Are you certain about this, Miss Isabella?" he had asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he handed her the drab grey tunic. "Especially now, in your condition." "It's because of my condition that I have to be certain, Henry," she had replied, resting a hand on her barely there bump. "I'm not just protecting a company anymore. I'm protecting a legacy for my child. They need to know what their great-grandfather built and why it matters." The work was grueling. Her body, already taxed by the first trimester, ached constantly. Her back was a knot of perpetual pain. But the physical discomfort was secondary to the emotional education she was receiving. She met Maria, a fellow cleaner, a single mother of 2, who was working 2 jobs and was terrified of being fired for taking a sick day when her son had a fever. She heard from the kitchen porters about how their overtime was being systematically shaved off their time cards. She saw the fear in the eyes of a young concierge who was relentlessly berated by a manager in front of guests for a minor mistake. This was the rot. This was Marcus Thorne's friction. Her marriage to Damien was another source of quiet pain. She had fallen in love with his drive, his electrifying energy, the way he looked at the world as something to be conquered. She thought his ambition was a fire to build things. She was slowly realizing it was a fire to consume them. The man who once held her and whispered about building a life together now barely looked at her. His conversations were about market caps and valuations. His touch, when it came, felt like an afterthought. She suspected he was having an affair. There were the late nights, the scent of an unfamiliar perfume on his suits, the way he guarded his phone like a state secret. She had no proof, only a deep, aching certainty in her gut. Part of this undercover mission was an escape, a way to connect with something real and meaningful, while her own home life felt increasingly hollow and false. She thought that by immersing herself in her family's true legacy, she might find the strength to confront the emptiness of her marriage. Today she was scrubbing a particularly stubborn mark near the main ballroom entrance. It looked like tar, probably from the sole of a guest's shoe. Maria was working on the other side of the lobby. "Don't strain yourself, Bella," Maria had called over a few minutes ago. "That one can wait for the buffer machine tonight." "I've almost got it," Isabella had called back with a smile. She liked the feeling of accomplishing a tangible task, of making something dirty clean again. It felt symbolic. Suddenly a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting to see a guest needing directions. Instead, she saw a pair of gleaming black leather shoes. Shoes she recognized instantly. Her eyes traveled up the perfectly tailored trousers, past the expensive suit jacket, and to the face of her husband. His expression was one of thunderous, apocalyptic fury. Her heart didn't just drop, it plummeted. Of all the places of all the times, standing just behind him, looking on with feline curiosity, was a stunning woman in a silk dress. The unfamiliar perfume she sometimes smelled on Damien's clothes seemed to radiate from her in a suffocating cloud. In that instant, Isabella's two worlds, the secret undercover world of Bella and the painful, fractured world of her marriage, collided with the force of a car crash. "Isabella!" Damien hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was meant for her ears only. "What in God's name are you doing?" Damien didn't wait for an answer. His hand shot out and clamped around Isabella's upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. He hauled her to her feet with a force that made her stumble. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she instinctively put a hand to her stomach. "Not here," he snarled, his eyes darting around the lobby. A few guests were beginning to cast curious glances their way. The performance was everything, and his was falling apart. He began pulling her, half dragging her toward the service corridor she had emerged from minutes earlier. "Damien, stop. You're hurting me," Isabella whispered, trying to regain her footing. The sudden rough movement sent a sharp pain through her lower back. He ignored her, his grip like iron. He shoved open a door marked Utility and pushed her inside the door, swinging shut behind them, plunging them into the dim light and the smell of bleach and damp mops. He let go of her arm, and she leaned against a stack of linen carts, catching her breath. He stood before her, his chest heaving, his face contorted in a mask of rage and disgust. "Have you lost your mind?" He began, his voice dangerously low. "Are you actively trying to destroy me? To humiliate me in front of my business partners, my associates?" He couldn't even bring himself to say mistress. "I'm working," Isabella said, her voice quiet but steady. She would not let him see her crumble. "Not here, not now. Working." He let out a short, incredulous laugh that was devoid of any humor. "You call this working? You're Isabella Ashworth. Your husband is a millionaire. You have a black Amex with no limit, a house with a staff, and you're here on your hands and knees scrubbing floors for minimum wage. There are things you don't understand, Damien." "Oh, I understand perfectly," he shot back, jabbing a finger in the air. "I understand that you have no respect for me, no respect for the name I have built. I dragged myself out of the gutter, Isabella. I worked myself to the bone so that my wife would never have to know what a day of real labor feels like. And you throw it all back in my face. For what? To feel authentic, to play poverty for a day." The hypocrisy of his words was staggering. He accused her of playing poverty while he paraded his mistress, a woman dripping in the very wealth he claimed to provide for his wife. A cold resolve began to solidify in Isabella's heart, replacing the shock and fear. "This has nothing to do with you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "This is about my family." "Your family?" he scoffed. "Your father was a history professor who lived in a dusty house full of books. What could this possibly have to do with him?" He still didn't know. After all this time, he had never bothered to look past the simple, unassuming surface she presented. He had seen what he wanted to see, a girl with no connections, no power, someone who would be entirely dependent on him. It had been a crucial part of his attraction to her. Isabella looked at him, the expensive suit, the frantic anger in his eyes, and she saw him for what he truly was. A terrified little boy, petrified that someone would discover he was a fraud. His wealth wasn't a source of security. It was a costume he wore, and he was terrified she was about to rip it off. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, Serafina was no fool. She had seen the raw panic on Damien's face. She knew this was no random encounter. "That's not her." He had said a lie so transparent it was insulting. A man like Damien Ashworth didn't react that way to a stranger. Her mind was racing. Who was this woman? And why would she be working here? Serafina's entire relationship with Damien was built on a foundation of information and leverage. She needed to understand this. Her survival depended on it. She casually strolled over to the concierge desk, a picture of bored elegance. A young man with a nervous energy and a name tag that read Thomas straightened his tie as she approached. "Excuse me," Serafina said, leaning in conspiratorially and flashing him a dazzling smile. "My friend just had a rather intense reunion with one of your staff, a pregnant cleaner. I just want to make sure she's all right. Do you know her, Bella, I think?" Thomas looked flustered. "Ma'am, I'm not really supposed to discuss other employees." Serafina's smile didn't waver, but her eyes turned to ice. She let her gaze drop to the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, then back to him. "Of course. It's just that Mr. Ashworth is a very important guest. He's here for the gala, meeting with Mr. Rothschild. He gets very concerned about the welfare of the common folk. It's so endearing. He would be so grateful for your discretion." The name-dropping worked. Thomas swallowed hard. "Bella? Yes, she's new. Keeps to herself, mostly. A hard worker. Mr. Abernathy, the GM, hired her personally, which is a little unusual. He normally leaves that to HR. Mr. Abernathy." Serafina's finely plucked eyebrows rose. "The general manager hiring a cleaner directly." That was an interesting thread. "And what's her full name for our records, of course? Mr. Ashworth likes to be thorough." I believe it's Rossi," Thomas stammered. "Bella Rossi." Rossi. The name echoed in Serafina's mind. She had a vague recollection of it. While doing her initial deep dive on Damien, she had researched his wife, but the public records were sparse. Isabella's family history was surprisingly private, but the name Rossi, it was connected to something big. She thanked Thomas with another brilliant smile and glided away, pulling out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, her search terms precise: Rossi Hotel, New York, Grand Elysian. The search results loaded, and Serafina's breath caught in her throat. The screen was filled with articles about the Rossi Hotel Group, a multi-billion-dollar global empire of luxury hotels. Founder, Antonio Rossi. Current majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board, his granddaughter Isabella Rossi. The phone nearly slipped from her manicured fingers. It wasn't that the cleaner was Damien's wife. It was that the Grand Elysian, this entire palace of wealth and power, belonged to the cleaner. The woman Damien had just manhandled and dragged into a utility closet owned the very ground he stood on. A slow, venomous smile spread across Serafina's face. The game had just changed. Damien thought he was the king, but he was just a pawn in the queen's castle. And now she was the only one on his side of the board who knew it. The power dynamic had shifted seismically, and the leverage she now held was immeasurable. Back in the closet, Damien delivered his final cruel blow. "I can't do this anymore, Isabella," he said, his voice cold and final. This circus, your refusal to be the woman I need you to be. I want a divorce." He expected tears. He expected pleading. Instead, Isabella simply looked at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. The resolve in her heart had turned to steel. He had just handed her the key to her own cage. "All right, Damien," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "If that's what you want." The quiet acceptance stunned him more than any outburst would have. Before he could process it, the door to the utility closet swung open. A security guard stood there, accompanied by the distinguished silver-haired general manager, Mr. Abernathy. "Is everything all right here?" Mr. Abernathy asked, his polite tone layered with authority. His eyes, however, were fixed on Damien's hand, which was still gripping Isabella's arm. He then looked at Isabella with a gaze of pure paternal concern. "Miss Bella, is this man bothering you?" Damien stared at the manager, his mind reeling. The audacity. "This is my wife," he spat out. "This is a private matter." Mr. Abernathy's expression didn't change. "Sir, in this hotel, any staff member who is being harassed by a guest, regardless of their relationship outside these walls, becomes a hotel matter. Please release her. Now." The confrontation was escalating, drawing a small crowd in the corridor. It was a nightmare. Damien, flustered and cornered, let go of Isabella's arm as if it were burning him. He saw Serafina approaching her face a mask of faux concern, but he could see a glint of something else in her eyes. Triumph. He had no idea how right he was. She knew his secret, and she knew Isabella's, and she was about to watch him immolate himself on the altar of his own arrogance. The Grand Elysian's imperial ballroom was a symphony of opulence. Ceilings frescoed with neoclassical angels soared 3 stories high, from which hung 3 of the most magnificent baccarat crystal chandeliers ever commissioned. The tables were draped in heavy damask linen, set with Christoffel silver and Waterford crystal. The air hummed with the low murmur of 100 conversations, each one representing billions of dollars in capital influence and power. Damien Ashworth stood near the main stage, a flute of vintage Dom Perignon in his hand. He was trying to regain his composure to paste the mask of unflappable confidence back onto his face. The confrontation in the service corridor had rattled him more than he cared to admit. Isabella's calm acceptance of a divorce was unsettling, and the intervention of the hotel manager was a public humiliation he was struggling to compartmentalize. "Are you all right, darling?" Serafina asked, appearing at his side. She placed a cool hand on his arm, her expression a perfect portrait of concern. "You look pale. Did you sort things out with your wife?" "It's handled," Damien said curtly, taking a large gulp of champagne. "She's an embarrassment. It's over." He looked around the room, spotting his target. "There's Rothschild, and look, he's with William Sterling." William Sterling was an old money titan, a board member of several multinational corporations, and a legendary investor known for his shrewdness and his obsession with corporate integrity. Getting Sterling on board would be an even bigger coup than landing Roth's child. "This is it, Serafina," Damien whispered, his eyes gleaming with renewed ambition. "This is the deal that puts Ashworth capital into the stratosphere. Watch and learn." Serafina watched, but not him. Her eyes drifted around the room. She was holding a bomb, a piece of information so explosive she could detonate Damien's entire life with a single sentence. The question was when and how to pull the pin. For now, she would enjoy the show. She wanted to see just how deep a hole he could dig for himself. Damien, oozing charisma, approached the two older men. "Olivier William, wonderful to see you." He launched into his pitch. He spoke of synergy disruption and aggressive growth strategies. He was magnetic, persuasive, painting a picture of a future where anyone who invested with him would be printing money. "My one concern, Damien," William Sterling said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "is the underlying asset in this merger. The Lux Gen Hotel portfolio. Their management has been shaky, their brand diluted. They lack vision." A slow, predatory grin spread across Damien's face. This was the perfect opening. "You're absolutely right, William, and that's the opportunity. They lack the kind of rigorous top-down leadership that I bring to the table. Their corporate culture is frankly too soft, too focused on sentimental nonsense instead of shareholder value. It reminds me of the management here at the Grand Elysian, if I'm being honest." He gestured around the magnificent ballroom. "Beautiful, of course, but I hear whispers. The board is sentimental, stuck in the past. The company is coasting on its legacy, not innovating. It's ripe for a hostile takeover for a leader who isn't afraid to trim the fat and maximize profit." Sterling and Rothschild exchanged a look that Damien misinterpreted as agreement. Serafina, standing just behind him, had to suppress a laugh. It was perfect. He was standing in this flagship hotel of the Rossi Group, insulting its management to a key investor, all while the owner of the entire chain was likely in the staff locker room, changing out of her cleaning uniform. As if on cue, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly. The chatter subsided. Mr. Abernathy, the general manager, walked onto the stage and approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "Here at the Rossi Hotel Group, we believe our greatest asset isn't our real estate or our thread counts. It is our legacy, a legacy of integrity, service, and family, passed down from our founder, Antonio Rossi." Damien shifted impatiently, annoyed by the interruption. He wanted to get back to his pitch. "Tonight," Mr. Abernathy continued, "we were supposed to have our COO, Mr. Marcus Thorne, address you. However, due to some internal restructuring, Mr. Thorne is no longer with the company. Effective immediately." A ripple of shock went through the corporate guests in the room. Firing a COO on the night of the biggest gala of the year was a bold, almost shocking move. Instead, Mr. Abernathy's face broke into a genuine, proud smile. "It is my distinct honor to introduce the person who represents the true heart and future of this company, the woman whose vision is guiding us forward. Please welcome the chairwoman of the board of the Rossi Hotel Group, Ms. Isabella Rossi." Time seemed to slow down for Damien. The name hit him like a physical blow. Rossi. The cleaner's name. Isabella Rossi. It couldn't be. And then from the wings of the stage she appeared. The transformation was absolute. Gone was the drab grey uniform and the weary posture. In her place was a vision of quiet, radiant power. Isabella was wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue maternity gown of deep silk that fell gracefully over her pregnant form. Her dark hair was styled in soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. A single stunning piece of jewelry adorned her neck, the legendary Rossi star, a sapphire and diamond necklace that was rumored to be priceless. She didn't look like a different person. She looked like the person she had always been, finally revealed. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. The flash of cameras went off like a volley of gunfire. Damien stood frozen, his champagne flute slipping from his nerveless fingers and shattering on the floor. The sound was lost in the swell of applause. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and horror. Isabella. The quiet, bookish girl. The daughter of a history professor. It was all a lie of a mission so vast and monumental it defied comprehension. The entire foundation of his marriage, of his perceived superiority, crumbled into dust. He looked at Serafina, desperate for some anchor in his spinning reality. She was looking at him, her eyes glittering with cold amusement. And in that moment, he knew. She had figured it out. She had watched him make a complete fool of himself, and she had let it happen. Isabella reached the podium and placed her hands gently on its sides. She scanned the crowd, her eyes calm and confident. She looked over the sea of faces, the investors, the socialites, the power brokers. And her gaze finally landed on her husband. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. There was no anger in her look, no triumph. There was only a profound and final pity. Then she turned her attention to the room. "Good evening," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "My grandfather, Antonio Rossi, taught me that to understand a home, you must be willing to walk in every room, from the penthouse suite to the boiler room. You must be willing to talk to everyone, not just those who sit at the head of the table, but those who set it." Her eyes swept over the room again. "For the past few weeks, I have been walking in those rooms. I have been listening. And I have learned that while our foundation is strong, some cracks have appeared in the walls. Cracks of fear, of disrespect, of a corporate culture that has begun to value profits over people." Damien felt William Sterling's icy gaze on him. He remembered his own words from just minutes before. Trim the fat, sentimental nonsense. He felt sick. "That ends tonight," Isabella declared. "We are a family, and we will be a company that honors every single member of that family, from our executives to our housekeepers." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Because, unlike some, I do not believe that integrity is sentimental nonsense. I believe it is the only currency that truly matters. It is the legacy I will pass on to my child." The applause was thunderous. It was a standing ovation. William Sterling was clapping the loudest, a look of immense respect on his face. He looked over at Damien, his expression one of pure disgust, and then turned his back completely. The deal wasn't just dead. It was vaporized. Damien's reputation was a smoldering crater. He stood alone in a small circle of shattered glass, a ghost at his own funeral, while his wife, the woman he had scorned, was being crowned. The applause that erupted for Isabella Rossi was not merely polite. It was a tidal wave of genuine admiration, a roar of approval that shook the frescoed angels on the ceiling. For Damien Ashworth, it was the sound of his own world being torn apart. He stood paralyzed in a small, self-contained circle of shattered glass from his dropped flute, an island of failure in a sea of celebration. The air, which moments ago had crackled with his own potent ambition, now tasted of ash. He watched as if in a nightmare, as the titans of industry he had so desperately sought to impress turned their backs on him, their faces alight with excitement for this new, unexpected power player. They swarmed the stage. Not him. He saw Olivier Rothschild, the man whose capital was meant to be his final stepping stone, lean over and say something to a colleague, gesturing vaguely in Damien's direction, before laughing dismissively. The gesture was a stiletto to the ribs. More painful still was the sight of William Sterling, the old money patriarch, whose respect Damien had craved like a drug, approached Isabella with a warmth reserved for cherished family. "Isabella, that was magnificent." Sterling's deep voice boomed, easily audible, over the subsiding applause. He took both her hands in his. "I knew your grandfather for 30 years. He was a lion of a man built of integrity from the ground up. Tonight, I saw his spirit in you. The courage to get your hands dirty to find the truth. Antonio would be bursting with pride." Isabella's smile was genuine, touched with emotion. "Thank you, William. That means more to me than any business deal ever could." "Nonsense, my dear. This is the best business deal." Sterling corrected her with a wink. "Integrity is the most undervalued asset on the market. Consider my fund and my personal counsel at your complete disposal. We will back you in whatever you choose to do next. The world needs more leaders like you, and fewer opportunists." His final word was delivered with a brief, withering glance in Damien's direction. It was a public execution delivered with the casual grace of the truly powerful. The last vestiges of Damien's composure crumbled. He had to escape. He turned his movements stiff and robotic and began to force his way through the crowd. The whispers followed him a sibilant, cutting wake. He heard snippets. "That's her husband. Can you imagine the humiliation?" Heard him bad-mouthing the hotel just minutes before. Every word was a fresh lash of the whip. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He imagined it was 100 messages, a cascade of questions and mockery. He couldn't look. He just needed air. He finally broke free into the cavernous, cool expanse of the lobby. It was mostly empty, a grand, silent testament to the empire he had just discovered he had no claim to. He leaned against a marble pillar, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs. His mind, usually a sharp, orderly machine of calculations and strategy, was a chaotic storm. He saw flashes of his past, the cramped, damp apartment of his childhood, the worn-out look on his mother's face as she counted pennies, the shame of wearing second-hand shoes. He had built his entire life as a fortress against those memories. Now the walls were tumbling down, and the ghosts were pouring in. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling. He needed an anchor. He needed Serafina. Her cold, pragmatic ambition felt like the only thing that made sense in this swirling vortex of chaos. He dialed her number. It rang once, then clicked directly to voicemail. The automated, impersonal voice on the other end was a slap in the face. She had already blocked him. A moment later, his screen lit up with a single text message notification. From her. His thumb shook as he opened it. "A valuable lesson, Damien. Always do your due diligence. Your wife's assets are legendary, but it seems you never made it onto her balance sheet. I don't invest in companies or men facing a hostile takeover from within. This is where I divest. Goodbye." It was a clinical, brutal severing. He was no longer an asset, so he was liquidated. He stared at the screen, the words blurring through a sudden film of hot, angry tears. He had been so sure she was a reflection of his success, but she was only ever a mirror, and now it was showing him the truth of his own pathetic reflection. He was worthless to her. "Damien." The voice was quiet, yet it cut through his spiraling panic like a surgeon's scalpel. He looked up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, in a gesture that felt foreign and weak. Isabella stood 20 feet away, flanked by the ever-present, ever-loyal Mr. Abernathy. The gala's noise was a distant hum, granting them a strange, stage-lit privacy in the opulent lobby. "What do you want?" he croaked, his voice hoarse. "Have you come to collect your pound of flesh, to watch me bleed a little more?" "No," she said, her expression holding not triumph, but a profound and weary sorrow that was somehow more damning. "I truly never wanted this. I was going to tell you everything to ask for the divorce in private. Tonight, after the gala." She sighed a deep, painful breath. "Your cruelty in that closet had forced my hand. You created this scene, not me. You lied to me," he accused, his voice rising with desperation. "For years you let me believe you were this simple, helpless little thing. Was it all a game, a secret test you could lord over me? I have never not once lied to you." She stated, her voice as solid and unyielding as the marble beneath their feet. "Everything I ever told you was true. I am a quiet person. I do prefer books to parties. My father was a history professor who loved his work. Those are all parts of me. You just chose to believe they were the only parts. You never asked about my mother's family. You never inquired about the Rossi name. Why? Because a wife with no connections, no power of her own was what your ego required. You didn't fall in love with me, Damien. You fell in love with a story you told yourself about me." She took a measured step forward, her gaze unflinching. "Do you remember 2 years ago, when I drafted a proposal for a charitable foundation to provide scholarships and emergency aid to hospitality workers? I was so excited to show it to you." He stared at her blankly. The memory was vague, unimportant. "You glanced at the cover page and called it a cute little hobby," she reminded him, her voice sharp with the memory of the sting. "You told me I should focus on redecorating the guest wing. You dismissed my passion as a trifle because it didn't involve social climbing or acquiring more wealth. You were so busy looking up at the sky you wanted to conquer, you never thought to look at the woman standing right next to you." The truth of her words was devastating, dismantling his rage and leaving only a hollow ache. "The divorce you demanded," she continued, her tone shifting to one of cool finality, "has been accepted. My legal team, the best in the country. I assure you will be in touch with your lawyer in the morning. I expect this to be swift and clean." A new, more practical terror began to dawn on him. "The penthouse," he stammered. "The house in the Hamptons. The art collection. The penthouse is a corporate asset of the Rossi Group reserved for the Chairwoman. The Hamptons estate has been in my mother's family for a century. The art was purchased from the Rossi Family Trust." She answered each sentence a precise, clean cut. "They are not, nor have they ever been, marital property." He felt the blood drain from his face. "So what is mine?" he whispered. "Ashworth Capital is yours, Damien," she confirmed. "The company you built with your own 2 hands. You will leave this marriage with everything you brought into it. As for the lifestyle you've grown accustomed to, that was funded by the profits from the sentimental nonsense you hold in such contempt." He had nothing left to say. He was a king who had just discovered his entire kingdom was made of cardboard, and the queen was taking back the castle. Isabella turned to leave, but then paused, a final thought occurring to her. "I met a woman while I was working here," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Her name is Maria, a single mother of 2, a phenomenal worker. The other day she told me in the locker room that her son had a 103-degree fever, but she came to work anyway. She was terrified that if she called in sick, her manager, a man under pressure from our former COO, to cut overtime hours, would fire her. She was literally choosing between her job and her sick child. She looked Damien directly in the eye, letting him see the full weight of her conviction. This afternoon I called Maria into Mr. Abernathy's office. I offered her the position of head of housekeeping for this entire hotel. I watched her burst into tears when she saw the salary and the platinum-level health benefits package. She will never have to make that impossible choice again. That Damien, she concluded, placing a gentle protective hand over her pregnant belly, is a return on investment. That is what a real legacy looks like. With that final devastating pronouncement, she turned and walked away, her posture erect, her future certain. Mr. Abernathy gave Damien one last look of profound pity and followed his queen. Damien was left alone in the vast, echoing lobby, a trespasser in the ruins of a life he now understood was never truly his. The months that followed were a study in contrasts. Isabella Rossi, the undercover heiress, became a global sensation, but she eschewed the celebrity channeling the media attention back toward her mission. She instituted the Antonio Rossi Scholarship Fund for the children of all Rossi Group employees. She implemented a new Voice of the Family system, an anonymous and heavily protected channel for any employee to report ethical concerns directly to her office. The company, once seen as a staid institution, was now hailed as a paradigm of modern compassionate capitalism. Its stock value more than doubled. Damien's downfall was just as swift, but far quieter. His reputation was irrevocably tarnished. He was the man who had failed to see the diamond in his own house, the fool who had insulted his own benefactor. Banks saw him as a liability, investors as a joke. Ashworth Capital starved of new capital, and hemorrhaging clients withered on the vine. Within 18 months, he was forced to sell its remnants for pennies on the dollar. He vanished from the world of galas and glass towers, trading his penthouse view for a generic apartment in a featureless suburb, a prisoner of the very mediocrity he had spent his life trying to outrun. 6 months after the gala, Isabella gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She held her in her arms in the quiet of the hospital room, looking down at the tiny, perfect face. This was her true north, her real legacy. She named her Antonia. Sometimes late at night in her warm Brooklyn brownstone, a home filled with books, laughter, and the smell of baking. Not the cold silence of a mansion, she would stand by the window with her sleeping daughter in her arms. She would look out across the river at the glittering Manhattan skyline. Her eyes would always find the soft, welcoming glow of the Grand Elysian. She had descended into its depths, seeking to cleanse her family's legacy, and in the process had cleansed her own life. She had learned that strength wasn't about the walls you build to keep others out, but the bridges you build to let them in. She was Isabella Rossi. Not a wife, not a victim, not a secret. Just a woman, a mother and a queen in a castle she had rebuilt, stone by loving stone. And so the story of Isabella Rossi and Damien Ashworth comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that what we see on the surface is often just a fraction of the truth. A person's worth is not defined by their clothes, their job, or the opinions of others, but by the strength of their character and the courage in their heart. Damien, blinded by his own ambition, saw weakness in his wife's humility, never realizing it was the source of her incredible power. Isabella, in turn, had to walk through the fire of betrayal and humiliation to reclaim not just her family's company, but her own soul, proving that the greatest empires are built on a foundation of kindness and integrity. What did you think of Isabella's ultimate power move? Do you think Damien got what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and surprise you. Thank you for listening.